Well, it's a little soon to talk specifically about what's being considered. What we see is that as we apply additional pressure on the ground, as our Iraqi and, in the case of Syria, some of our partnered forces there in Syria, as they pressure this enemy, it forces ISIS, forces them to move. And when they move, they expose themselves. We're able to bring some devastating air power against them. What's being talked about out there is how much tolerance we should have for civilian casualties. And that's part of our American values, right? We say that we bring our values to war with us. So this is a difficult discussion. There's always going to be tragedy in any war. That's why no one likes wars. So we have to find this right balance between achieving military effects and how much collateral damage we're willing to accept. Yeah. This is a continuous discussion, Allison. This is not a discussion that starts or stops at any time. It's a daily thing.
Meanwhile, Iraqi troops closing in on ISIS in the battle to retake the key city of Ramadi. This as U.S. officials discuss changes to how the U.S. governs airstrikes over Iraq and Syria, the so-called rules of engagement. CNN's Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr has the latest for us. What have you learned, Barbara?
Good morning, Allison. The U.S. military, by the hour, keeping an eye on the situation in Ramadi as Iraqi forces continue very slowly to try and advance to the city center. They are running into what they knew they would run into: barricades, booby traps, IEDs, bombs, whole buildings wired to blow up. This was very well known to them. The U.S. has been providing them months of training on how to deal with these obstacles. And so it is still very slow going for them to get into the center of Ramadi. And the question we've talked about all week, if they can get Ramadi back, will they really be able to hold on to it over the long term? It's a real test of Iraqi forces and, of course, U.S. strategy to combat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And as for U.S. strategy, we now know there is indeed a very quiet conversation going on amongst the national security agencies, the Pentagon, the State Department, the White House, about whether to loosen the rules of engagement, the rules that govern when airstrikes can be launched. U.S. officials are insistent it's not about increased risk to hitting civilians inadvertently in these airstrikes. They still will take every precaution not to do it, but they want to see if, to keep the pressure up on ISIS from the air, if there is a way to adjust some of the rules, the need for intelligence, the coordination, so they can continue to have increased airstrikes, increased pressure on ISIS. Chris?
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the reporting on this. Let us know what else develops, obviously. Also breaking overnight.
Iraqi forces in a fierce battle to retake Ramadi. Now, word that the U.S. may be reconsidering its rules of engagement. Let's get a status report on both issues. Colonel Stephen Warren is the spokesman for Operation Inherent Resolve and for the anti-ISIS coalition in Iraq. Colonel, thank you so much for being with us on this Christmas Eve. It's nice to see you. We've heard that Iraqi forces are using the model of a boa constrictor to choke off ISIS in Ramadi. Can you tell us how that's working?
Allison, good morning. The Iraqi security forces over the last month or so have slowly encircled the city of Ramadi to isolate it from any possibility of being supported by ISIL fighters that are outside of the city. So they've isolated the city on all points of the compass. They've cut off all of the supply routes in and out of the city so that this enemy is not able to reinforce himself with equipment, weapons, or manpower. And now they're beginning to squeeze that noose around the city slowly but surely. Just 2 days ago, they were able to successfully cross the Euphrates River in a combat bridging maneuver. First one we've seen in the Middle East probably since the 70s.
And Colonel, we know that this is incredibly harrowing work for those soldiers because ISIS has reportedly planted thousands of IEDs, explosive devices, throughout the city. So how are they managing that?
The Iraqis were in a fierce fight yesterday, I'll tell you. We watched a lot of it from the ops center. This enemy has set up defensive belts. So they used IEDs, the very same IEDs that we faced here in Iraq years ago, but now they use them in clusters as if they were minefields. They will rig entire houses to explode if you come near them. So the Iraqis have to very deliberately probe this defensive area and find a weak spot. At the same time, American and coalition air power is overhead. We've got B-1s in this fight. And when we find obstacles that we know we can hit, we'll strike them from the air as well to try and disable them.
Colonel, can you explain the transformation that you've seen in the Iraqi army? Because we all remember back in May when the Defense Secretary Ash Carter said that they were not up for the fight. They, in fact, had retreated in the face of ISIS. So now the ferocity that we're seeing from them. Let me just remind our viewers what Defense Secretary Carter said back then and then get you to comment.
The Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight. They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force, and yet they failed to fight. They withdrew from the site, and that says to me, and I think to most of us, that we have an issue with the will.
So, Colonel, what's changed? How are they able to fight so ferociously now?
I remember when Secretary Carter told your own Barb Starr that back in May. One of the things that's changed, Allison, is the American, specifically American, but also with great assistance from our coalition partners, training program. We've spent a year training the Iraqi security forces. We've trained almost 16,000 Iraqi soldiers now. And we've also equipped them with modern U.S. equipment. So this training and equipping program has absolutely brought their capability level, their confidence level, their morale. It's all begun to come up. We've also seen some encouraging signs from the Iraqi government to reduce sectarianism, to reduce some of the tensions between the Sunni and the Shia inside of the government. So all of these little things help. And then, of course, there's nothing like winning. You know, the Iraqis have had some good success. They liberated Tikrit. They've liberated Beji. They've liberated parts of the Haditha corridor on the northern part of the Euphrates River. So with victory and with success comes added confidence. Have to be clear, though, Allison, we've still got a long way to go. This is still a fairly young army. We've only trained 16,000 of them, and they have a lot of fighting ahead of them.
Colonel, let's talk about the discussions that are ongoing about changing the rules of engagement for the U.S. in Iraq and Syria, particularly as it relates to airstrikes. What is being considered?
Well, it's a little soon to talk specifically about what's being considered. What we see is that as we apply additional pressure on the ground, as our Iraqi and, in the case of Syria, some of our partnered forces there in Syria, as they pressure this enemy, it forces ISIS, forces them to move. And when they move, they expose themselves. We're able to bring some devastating air power against them. What's being talked about out there is how much tolerance we should have for civilian casualties. And that's part of our American values, right? We say that we bring our values to war with us. So this is a difficult discussion. There's always going to be tragedy in any war. That's why no one likes wars. So we have to find this right balance between achieving military effects and how much collateral damage we're willing to accept. Yeah. This is a continuous discussion, Allison. This is not a discussion that starts or stops at any time. It's a daily thing.
Colonel, it's Christmas Eve, and we're thinking of you and all of the soldiers and fighting men and women over there. How will you be celebrating Christmas?
Well, Allison, you know, the good people in Hollywood have donated a copy of Star Wars to us.
Wow.
So it's, yeah, how about that? So some of our guys have reduced from a 12-hour shift down to an 8-hour shift to give themselves a little time to catch a movie and maybe let their hair down for a second. But I want to be clear, we'll continue to stand watch here, and we want all of you to enjoy your Christmas and know you're going to be safe because we are here standing on this wall.
Colonel Stephen Warren, we so appreciate that, and our thoughts and prayers are with all of you over there. Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you.
We're following a lot of news this morning. Let's get right to it.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.